I'm about to meet the girls and we're going to go to the old asylum. That's it there, the red building.
That was the wrong way to do that. I'm scared, actually.
Hello everyone, as you can tell from the title, today we're talking about St. Kevin's. What is St. Kevin's? Well, it's this really big, and I mean really big mental institution, abandoned mental institution. You can see it nearly wherever you are in Cork, because that's how high up it is, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. I didn't grow up in Cork, so I never knew about it, but everybody who grew up in Cork knew about St. Kevin's. It was the type of thing that parents would say to their kids when they're misbehaving, like, stop now or I'll send you to St. Kevin's, that sort of thing. It was there for a really long time, and it partially burnt down a couple years ago. I think it was 2017. How? I don't know, but yeah, it's kind of creepy. And then, whether surprisingly or not surprisingly, when you look up the history, it gets creepier. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today in this video. So stay tuned for that one. So let's just get into the history of it. St. Kevin's was built as an annex or an extension to Our Lady's Hospital, which, closed down a lot earlier, around the 90s. So you've St. Kevin's that closed in 2002, whereas Our Lady's Hospital closed around the 90s. St. Kevin's was built in the 1890s to accommodate up to 1,400 patients, and it kind of always just had a bad reputation. Inspectors would go to the institution every year and it never went well, and it was never up to scratch. In fact, it was kind of appalling. The general consensus between all the reports was that the people there were guilty of nothing. They were innocent, they were vulnerable, and they were harmless, which is a kind of thing that a lot of Irish people say when someone's not really any threat to anyone. A direct quote says that they are victims of misfortune, they are victims of illness, and indeed, tragically, of abandonment. They deserve our best and they got our worst. Instead, we lock them up in a vermin-infested, unsanitary, dirty, dark confinement. It's a disgrace. St. Kevin's is built very close and kind of overlooking the banks of the River Lee, which is the river that runs through Cork. Unfortunately, then that actually resulted in a lot of patient deaths because a lot of them drowned, maybe trying to escape. I don't know, that's what you would generally assume. So through the years, inspectors would visit, and what is written in the reports is pretty unsettling. So in 1934, the inspector found that there was no soap, there was no towels, there were no curtains on the windows, and there was no seats on the toilets. The bathrooms were filthy, and the patient's own money was used to buy 6 washing machines that 21 patients in a particular, female patients in a particular ward used to wash people's clothes. The following year, an inspector went back and found that many of the patients were being put to bed at 5:30. There was no curtains in the dormitories, and bits of wood were being used to cover up windows in the male bathrooms. Some of the patients were even incarcerated in these units that were roofed like a stall, and the door was bolted with 3 farmyard bolts. Then in 1936, a report says that they were doing nothing during the day. No activities, no nothing. Patients were sitting around waiting for bed, which was somewhere in between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. Workers were never really attending to the patients. The patients would just sit around and wait for bedtime. The 1938 report says that, Our Lady costs approximately 10 million to 11 million pounds annually to run, and the service that they're providing is extremely poor. And for the most part, they seem to be providing the worst form of custodial care. In terms of care for the mental health, there wasn't any. The inspector that went to the institution in 1938 said that the approach to the delivery of mental health care in Cork City and County is that It is seriously deficient. No clear objectives appear to have been identified, no priorities delineated, and their solutions adopted. There appears to be a lack of clear lines of command and proper structured consultation. So when you're thinking about this place costing 11 million to run, and it's filthy, and I mean filthy, like the outside of the hospital would be littered with like rubbish and discarded toilet rolls, and the hallways of the institution were described to be dirty beyond description, is the actual quote, was said to be vermin infested, completely unsanitary, dark, very confined. And to think that, they never planned any activities throughout the day. Patients would just wait to be put to bed, which would be around 5:30 p.m. And that there was no real approach to mental health. There was no real structure. It kind of starts to get a little bit more hairy here. Like in 1939, we don't actually get the actual report, but we get someone saying that, the report is not public, but that they were able to read it. This person is saying, in reading that report from 1939, that it is among the most appalling, distressing, disturbing, offensive documents that they've ever had the misfortune to read. So I don't think I want to know what it said. They do not deserve what is being done to them. They are victims of misfortune, they are victims of illness, and indeed tragically of abandonment. We take most of their income, the best part of £40 a week from them. They pay for that confinement. It is a disgrace that people have been paid large salaries twice and three times the average industrial wage. They should resign or be sacked. They are unfit for their job. They are a disgrace to the profession, and they should be dispensed with. So this was 1940, and this place stayed open until 2002. So where was the 11 million going? It was going to salaries. People up top and people down below. It was just paying people for what? For ruining lives? A past resident, Helena King, came out and said that her time there was anguish, having nothing to do all day while watching the nurses sit around and chat and laugh. And she was loaded with drugs 2 to 3 times a day forcibly, and even overdosed at times. I was able to find a report written up by the Mental Health Commission of Ireland, and it was just reviewing health practices within mental institutions, and I found some notes on St. Kevin's that weren't great. It was just basically everything that the other reports said, and I'm going to include some of the ones that stood out to me. This one in particular, about saying that he consented to it when he really didn't, and then this sort of thing was mentioned more than once regarding the drugs that were administered. Now, we've already seen that woman come out and say that she was forcefully fed drugs multiple times a day that even caused her to overdose. So while an inspector was there, they also asked questions and found that the length of time that drugs were being administered to the patients was wrong, basically. We also know that in St. Kevin's, electroshock therapy was administered to its patients, primarily without consent, and it's a really outdated and brain damaging procedure that forces a seizure onto whoever is receiving the shock therapy, and it is known to cause serious memory loss, like large chunks of memory being lost and long-term confusion. And this was being done to people who didn't need it, shouldn't have even been in the mental institution in the first place. So many of the women who were administered to St. Kevin's were victims of domestic abuse within their marriages, and when they came forward about it, the husband got together with the doctor and signed them off to go to St. Kevin's, and they died there. A lot of them died there, and their great-granddaughters or great-grandsons are now reaching out, trying to find out where they're buried, because we don't even know. And there's no real way of knowing really the absolute details of what went on. A total of 55 accidents were recorded that happened to patients. In 1 year, there was even 4 deaths of patience. But enough with the quotes, enough with the research, all that kind of stuff, the history. I'm going to talk about what it was like to go there. So I walked up with 3 of my friends, and it was a really, really steep incline. You had to come away from the city, and the hill was literally like this, and it went on for so long. So you can imagine. And it got kind of weird because the closer we got, the more kind of derelict the houses started to look. And then we got there and, you know, there was a gap in a fence, and that's how we got in. It was, and I'm not making this up, this isn't to be dramatic, this isn't for the sake of the video. I really felt really sad. The vibe was bad. There's no denying it. And I asked my friends and they agreed with me. So creepy. I cannot express to you the way it felt. I've never felt like that before. And there was 3 wild horses, and that kind of made me feel better, because the whole thing about like ghosts are scared of horses. So maybe like how they got there, I don't know, and I don't think they belong to anyone. But like, as you can see, it's very kind of daunting. It's very tall, it's very ominous, and then you have a church as well. As for whether or not the place is haunted, that's for you to judge. After St. Kevin's closed in 2002, for a couple of years they had security. Online I read a story from a security guard there, apparently, who was on a shift and dozed off around 3 or 4 hours in, sitting in one of, you know, the rooms, and he was woken up by a scratching sound. He came out into the hall and saw someone go into a room in front of him, and then when he went in, there was no one there. And the room in question was one of the padded cells. I don't know, but if things can be haunted, that place was haunted.